The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the tranquil lake where Daniel and his father, Robert, used to fish. It had been years since Daniel last sat on this old wooden dock, his feet dangling just above the water. As he skimmed a pebble across the surface, memories of his childhood flooded back, the laughter, the stories, and the promise he had made to his father but never fulfilled. Robert had always been more than just a father, he was Daniel's best friend. They shared a bond that many envied, a connection built on trust, understanding, and countless adventures. But life had a way of pulling people apart, and Daniel's pursuit of success had distanced him from the man who had once been his entire world. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and water, reminding him of the nights they spent camping, talking about everything and nothing. He clenched his fists. "I should have visited more," he muttered, guilt gnawing at him. Growing up, Daniel had idolized his father. Robert was a man of wisdom and warmth, always ready with a joke or a comforting word. He had taught Daniel how to ride a bike, how to tie a fishing knot, and most importantly, how to be a good person. "Promise me something, kiddo," Robert had once said as they sat by the campfire. "No matter where life takes you, always come back home." "I promise, Dad," Daniel had replied without hesitation. But promises were easy to make and hard to keep. College, work, and city life had consumed Daniel's time. He called less, visited rarely, and before he knew it, years had slipped away. Then, the phone call came. His father had suffered a heart attack. He survived, but he wasn't the same. His once sturdy frame had weakened, his voice had lost its strength, and the sparkle in his eyes had dimmed. That was why Daniel had returned, to make things right. Robert sat on the porch, wrapped in a thick sweater despite the summer air. His hands trembled slightly as he held a cup of tea. When Daniel approached, he looked up, his eyes filled with surprise and something else, relief. "Hey, Dad," Daniel said softly. "Well, I'll be," Robert chuckled, setting his cup down. "Look who finally decided to come home." Guilt twisted in Daniel's chest. "I should have come sooner." Robert waved a dismissive hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." They talked long into the night, their words filling the empty spaces that time had created. Robert never once complained about Daniel's absence. Instead, he listened, smiled, and occasionally threw in a joke about city life. "You know, I never stopped bragging about you," Robert said after a while. "Even when you were too busy to call, I told everyone my boy was out there making a name for himself." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "I missed you, Dad." Robert's eyes glistened. "I missed you too, son." The next morning, Daniel found himself rummaging through the garage. Among the fishing rods, old tools, and dusty photo albums, he found what he was looking for, a faded map. "Do you remember this?" he asked, unfolding it in front of Robert. His father squinted before laughing. "Our treasure map. I thought we lost that years ago." When Daniel was 10, they had created a map leading to hidden treasure deep in the woods behind their house. They had never finished the adventure, always getting sidetracked by fishing or storytelling. "We never found the treasure," Daniel said. Robert smirked. "Maybe it's still waiting for us." The next day, despite his father's protests about his age and health, Daniel insisted they go on one last adventure together. The woods were just as Daniel remembered, tall trees, rustling leaves, and the earthy scent of damp soil. They walked slowly, Daniel supporting his father whenever needed. "Remember when you fell into that creek?" Robert chuckled. Daniel groaned. "I was 12. You still won't let that go?" As they trekked through familiar paths, the years melted away. They weren't a grown man and his aging father anymore, they were just two best friends on an adventure. After an hour, they reached the spot marked on the map, an old oak tree with a hollow trunk. Daniel dug through the leaves and pulled out a small, rusted tin box. Inside, there was a toy compass, a few marbles, and a note in a child's handwriting. "To Dad, my best friend. One day, we'll find real treasure together." Robert laughed. "Guess we already did." Daniel looked at his father, understanding dawning upon him. The treasure wasn't gold or jewels, it was this. The memories, the bond, the time spent together. He reached for his father's hand. "We found it, Dad." Robert squeezed his son's hand, his eyes full of love. "We always had it, kiddo." Chapter 6, A Promise Kept. That night, they sat by the lake again, just like old times. "You know," Robert said, "I was afraid you'd forget about our adventures." Daniel shook his head. "Never." Silence stretched between them, comfortable and warm. "You kept your promise," Robert finally said. Daniel smiled. "And I won't break it again." As the stars reflected on the water, Daniel knew one thing for certain: friendship wasn't just found in playgrounds or classrooms. Sometimes, the best friend you could ever have was the one who had been with you from the very beginning. And no matter how much time had passed, it was never too late to come home.